Hi, I'm Kara French. I am assistant professor of history at Salisbury University in Maryland. I am also the director of our Gender and Sexuality Studies program. My historical research concerns sexual identity in 19th century America, especially the idea of sexual restraint. So I study groups that didn't have sex and sort of the controversies surrounded with not having sex in 19th century America. So Shakers, Catholic priests and nuns, and sexual reformers are the focus of my study. My manuscript in progress is entitled Against Sex, Identities of Sexual Restraint in Early America.
There has been some conversation about sort of how the asexuality movement has gained traction and really what has built to start or to initiate this conversation about asexuality. But I wonder, in some of your work, in one of your presentations, you mentioned that there are actually groups like these Shakers that have existed before the internet.
Far before the internet.
Far before the internet. Right. So
Okay.
what are some of the other social factors that might have actually also or contributed to bringing about this asexual movement and recognition?
So I don't discount the power of the internet to allow asexual people to meet and to organize and to kind of spread the gospel of asexuality, for lack of a better word, far and wide. But as a historian, I'm also interested in what are some of the other social and cultural factors going on. And so the groups that I study, I kind of call them sex-critical groups, or we might even say maybe proto-asexual identities might be another way to look at it. They decline quite precipitously after the turn of the 20th century. Shakers dwindle from about 6,000 people around the time of the Civil War to about 855. There are only 3 coveted Shakers left in the world. There's only 1 Shaker village left. There were once 16, kind of ranging from Maine to Kentucky. Catholic priests and nuns have also experienced a precipitous decline after Vatican II, most starkly seen in Catholic sisters. So around 1965, there are 180,000 sisters and nuns in the US. Today, there are only about 54,000. It's a decline of 70%.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And even terms like old bachelor, or old maid, and spinster, kind of using Google Books as an archive and using a specific tool called Google Ngrams, these words are just no longer used anymore. They peak around the turn of the 20th century, and they've sort of, I wouldn't say totally disappeared from our vocabulary, but they're just not a part of it the way they once were. So I think our sexual landscape used to include more sex-critical people kind of prior to the sexual revolution. These people have disappeared or faded away or fallen out in numbers. And there needs to be something to replace it. How do you express your lack of sexual attraction, your lack of desire to be in a sexual relationship? Maybe in 1900, you might have called yourself a spinster or an old bachelor, or you might have joined a Shaker community, or if you were Catholic, you might have become a priest or a nun. But these are becoming less popular options for a variety of social factors. How do we explain this? Well, asexual, right? I am an asexual. And this is also happening, though, at the same time where there's an expansion in sexual expressionism and acceptance for, people, unmarried heterosexuality, gay and lesbian identity.
Right.
So as all these other identities are finding acceptance, right? There's this presumption that, why would you ever repress your sexuality? You must have some kind of asexual identity, and if you're not repressing it for religious reasons, right? How do you explain that? And I think that's a particular reason why the term asexual needs to be said today in a way that maybe it wasn't said 100 years ago.
Excellent. And how did you come to the topic of asexuality and relating that to historical study?
Well, my degree is actually in history and women's studies from the University of Michigan. So I've always wanted to study the past with a focus on the present. So when I started to study people who practiced sexual restraint in early America and the amount of prejudice that they experienced, sometimes legal legislation and violence, and then I found out about asexuality studies and was introduced to the idea of asexuality. And I saw a lot of parallels there, especially with the way asexual bodies were talked about in a negative way, with the sort of doubts experienced around asexual identity as it's not a real thing or it's impossible. I saw it mirrored in my own historical sources. And then I actually went on the Avon message boards and I found asexual identified people trying to find a usable past, you might say, for themselves. So being conscious that we can't always project a present-day historical identity onto the past, but still maybe looking for role models or a sense of kinship with people in the past. So I was really kind of heartened to see asexuals doing this themselves, trying to find a history in many ways that doesn't just start in 2001 with Avon.
That sounds like really amazing work.
Yeah,
Thank you
you
so much.
I hope that was helpful.